Alright guys, welcome back to another video. I just completed this car yesterday and sent put some pictures online, and I had a number of people asking me with my last couple of builds what I'm using to mount the bodies. Um, to be honest, it's the most frustrating part of putting the car together for me. Um, there's some things that you want in slot car body mounts that can be difficult to achieve. So you're looking for some amount of body float, which is essentially how much the body can move around when mounted to the chassis. Um, After my tuning yesterday, this is where I ended up on this car, and you can see there's a lot of movement there, basically just enough to where it doesn't touch the tires, but it moves around a lot. Um, and this being a slider chassis, the body also has movement left and right like this. And that's actually the chassis sliding. So um, anyway, this is, you don't necessarily need this much float, but this particular car, I just, adjusted the tension on the screws until I achieved the best lap times, and this is where it ended up. So um, I'll show you how I achieved that. I used the same, except for really small cars. I use the same mounting method all the time. For those of you who want to preserve bodies and stuff, it's not going to work good for you if you're trying to use the factory posts. But for me, I'm just trying to achieve basically the highest performance that I can, which means I'm using a flat pan mount on most of my cars. So anyhow, I'm going to pull the body off this, and we're going to take a look at it. Now you can see I have flush mounted screws here in the bottom. I'm only using a 2-post mount, or a 2-position mount. Um, However, as you'll see when I take it off, there's some bump stops back here to keep the body from sagging below the line of the chassis. So they're there. They could be drilled and tapped if I wanted to. However, I don't see the need. Now, I'm using 256 hardware for these countersunk stainless steel screws. So I'm just pre-drilling with a 256 bit or something smaller, sometimes even to start. Perfectly aligned on the chassis, measured out with calipers. And then I'm countersinking it with a 37 degree countersinking bit. Hopefully you can see that. It's hard to see. This is just a single flute version from McMaster-Carr. They're about $6 or $7, but this is what gets you to basically where you can mount the screws flush. Um, and you just got to go slow with that. It takes a lot of material off easily. So I'm going to pull the body off this. And I'll show you. And I'll pre-warn you, it's not as pretty as the outside of the car, because to be honest, like I said, it's my least favorite part. So you can be kind of rough and tumble in here, and nobody's ever going to see it except you, as long as you're doing it right. So here's the inside of my car, and you can see I have these 4 ABS blocks mounted in there. And again, these 2 rears are bump stops, so that they're just resting on top of the chassis. And then the front 2 are drilled and threaded for the 256. And then I use Quickset, in this case, just Quickset 5-minute JB weld to hold them in. And what I do is I actually, when I want to get the height correctly, I'll use a flat block like this. In this case, I wanted to use rubber isolating washers, or silicone actually. So that's what these are right here. And they're just CA glued to the chassis, but what they do is isolate the harmonic frequencies of the chassis from the body. So it does aid in handling, and you end up with a lot better, or a lot quieter car, I should say, when you're done. So anyway, if I'm doing this car has a long enough wheelbase that I can just set it flat on the block like this, and it works good. You might want something with if you have a narrower car, you might have to get a block of wood, a 1x2, something flat. But essentially what I do is, with the interior out, and this is, again, a little tedious, is I'll set my 4 blocks on the chassis, and then I'll add a little of the JB weld to the 4 positions inside the body where I want to mount. And then I'll center up my body so that it's laying directly on the block. That way I know it's level with the chassis. And then, reaching through the windows or what have you with screwdriver or tweezers, I'll go ahead and push those blocks into the JB weld and then just let the car sit until the blocks are basically workable. So once they set up, which is pretty quick with the JB weld, I usually wait about 20 minutes or so and it's stiff enough you can work with the car. So then I'll pull the body back off and go ahead and add a lot more of the JB weld into the fillets and stuff up here inside of the body. And they're really quite strong. I've got many proxy cars out and stuff with this body mount solution, and they have no problems at all. So then once you have the blocks glued in place, they won't be drilled yet, of course. Then I simply and this is probably the most tedious part, but I'll put some rags underneath the body here. Sorry, this is kind of, my phone position is not great. I'll put some rags under the body or something to hold it like this, and then I'll gently get my chassis centered up inside of the wheel wells, and then I go ahead and mark the holes to drill into the ABS blocks. Once they're drilled, this is a soft material, it's lightweight. Once they're drilled, I use just a pin vise like this, and that's undersized for 256 by 1 or 2 numbers. I just hand drill through the ABS blocks and then go ahead and just let these machine screws self-tap as you thread the chassis in. So you want to make sure your JB weld's set up good when you go to tap the screws in. The first time you do that, there's going to be a good amount of resistance. After that, the threads are cut and they just come in and out really, really easily. So you could, mount 2 more screws in these rear blocks if you really wanted to, but again, usually you need a good amount of float, which means kind of a loose connection is good. Another thing to keep in mind is you could do front and rears as well, but you just use like a tall block and go into the front pan. The material I use is just this 1/4-inch ABS black plastic. It's really lightweight because it's somewhat porous, but it glues really well. I just scratch it up with a razor blade or something like that, and it glues really well. It's cheap, and I can easily cut it with just a normal fine jeweler's saw like this. So I'll just cut some squares, and of course, you could go in here and make these however clean you wanted to, but I just find that it's a little rough and tumble, but they're square and they're flat and they work really good. And that's pretty much the system I use on all of my cars to mount the bodies. And I feel like I've achieved some pretty good performance on a lot of my cars with that system. So anyway, that's just a quick run through of how I mount my bodies. Hopefully that answers some of your guys' questions. Thanks for watching.